Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody, and I'm joined today by Dr. Richard Nolthenius, who is the Astronomy Program Chair at Cabrillo College. Hi, Rick. How are you today?
Well, a little rushed, but, we're dealing with another atmospheric river. What can I say?
I know. I just tried to drive to the studio from where I live, which is about 45 minutes away, and found that Highway 1 was closed, and it would take me 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get back. So I'm at home. So we're using technology to put on this show today.
We're doing our best.
And so why don't you, I know, we'll do our best. And for those of you who don't know, in a live radio show, that normally when I'm in the studio, Eliza and I, my program engineer, will do a nonverbal communication to let me know what's going on, and we can't do that right now. So, Eliza, I just wanted to ask you to give me a 3-minute warning at the end of the show so I know when to close it. And feel free if you need to pipe in and tell me anything while we're talking, because I'm in Carmel, California. Rick is in Santa Cruz, California, and our guest is in Ottawa, Canada. So we're just going to do the best we can here. And thank you, Rick, for joining me today to interview our guest on how can we unlock climate science. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, so I run the astronomy program at Cabrillo College, and about 12 years ago I began teaching a climate class and totally got into it. I'm also a member of the Earth Futures Institute at UC Santa Cruz now, and have given a number of talks there, and I've given, a number of talks on K-Squid as well and elsewhere, and I see myself now as a digester of climate science and an educator. And so this subject that we're doing today is so central to what I'm doing. I'm really happy that I can be part of this.
Well, I am delighted that you're part of this. I thought you'd be the right person. And also, you've joined me many times on this show. Thank you very much. And also, you were a contributor, a multi-chapter author contributor to my book, Climate Abandoned. Here's a shameless plug.
Yeah.
Climate Abandoned. We're on the endangered species list, and I wanted to thank you for being an author there too.
Well, one of those chapters won Amazon bestseller list on oceans, and that was the one I contributed.
Well, the book was an Amazon bestseller. Today, our program is How Can We Unlock Climate Science? The climate crisis's harm to our global biodiversity is one of the world's most pressing challenges. The complexity of the climate crisis requires global, national, and local actions informed by multidisciplinary research. The goal of Creative Climate Commons' multi-year open climate campaign is to promote open access to research that will accelerate progress towards solving the climate crisis and preserving global biodiversity. If we are going to solve our global challenges, the global knowledge, meaning the research, data, educational resources, and software, must be open and available to all. We have big things to do. Our guest today is Monica Granados. Monica has a PhD in ecology from McGill University. While working on her PhD, Monica discovered incentives in academia which promote policies that make knowledge less accessible. Since then, Monica has devoted her career to working in the open science space in pursuit of making knowledge more equitable and accessible. Monica is presently Assistant Director of Open Climate at Creative Commons, working on the Open Climate Campaign, promoting open access to climate and biodiversity research. Dr. Monica Granados lives, as we mentioned before, in Ottawa, Canada. I think technology is great. Welcome, Monica, to Be Bold America. Are you there? Do we have Monica? Eliza?
She is connected, but I'm not hearing anything, so let me work on that while you talk for a moment.
Okay. Well, then, while Eliza's trying to figure out what's going on there with our technology, why, Rick, is this an important topic for you?
Well, there's several reasons. First of all, just because I link professional science journals in all of my writings, and if those only go to a place that is paywalled, then of course people at most can just read the abstract. And the danger I find with going to many of the popular outlets for science is that they don't always have getting it right as their number one priority, to put it delicately. Mm-hmm. And right, and we really need that. Whereas in the science motivational structure, scientists actually are rewarded in all ways for getting it right. And so you really want to get it from the source.
Well, I also find myself that I sign up for the New York Times to get past the paywall, and it's $17 a month. And I sign up for the Washington Post to get past the paywall, and it's $120 a year. So when you're talking about paywalls, this is a significant block because our news industry needs to make a profit, but yet we need to get the climate facts and data and knowledge out to the public. So paywalls is an interesting problem, right?
Well, it's an interesting problem, and of course it can be even worse when you have to subscribe to a big science journal, like I'm thinking of the American Astronomical Society, which is one of the outlets, or the Astrophysical Journal, I should say, for the American Astronomical Society, and you'll pay many, many hundreds a year to just be a member and have access to that journal. So it's a problem everywhere. If you have multiple articles from Nature and from American Meteorology Society, and they all have fees like that. So you could easily chew up a big chunk of your salary just trying to subscribe to all of these. And of course,
many of the people that need this information don't have the money to sign up for all of this, let alone the New York Times and the Washington Post. Oh, Monica, welcome. Welcome to Be Bold America.
Hi, thank you so much. It seems like, the technology is helping us connect, but we just had a couple of hiccups to get through.
Good. Well, we're in very different places of the world, so it is really a miracle when you think about it. And so welcome, Monica. I just wanted you to know that we're actually living with the disruption that today's climate crisis is causing. I couldn't drive to the station because I was out of electricity for 55 hours. And I didn't hear about the news because I didn't have any television, and that Highway 1 was closed, and I started driving to Santa Cruz and realized I couldn't get there. So I turned around and came back. And I just want to point out to people that this is what the disruption looks like, trying to put together a live radio program just after we had an atmospheric river. And they're calling them that because they're more than storms. And we have another one coming in tomorrow. So I just want to let you know, Monica, that this is kind of a timely topic.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what's so exceptional about climate change is that it's going to affect us in these little ways and in really big ways. I have another really concrete example. I'm on the other side of the continent in Ottawa. It's the capital of Canada, and one of the major attractions in Ottawa is the canal. And in the winter, it freezes over, and businesses set up shops on the canal, and people skate to work, and families gather around and, enjoy the recreation that the canal affords. And this year, for the first time since, it became an official event in Ottawa, the canal did not freeze. So,
oh my.
So businesses did not weren't able to conduct their business on the canal. No one was able to skate it this year because it was too warm for it to freeze over with enough ice to make it safe.
These are the examples of what is happening, and it's happening all around the world. Now, we do have about 4 minutes to our break, so maybe a good place to begin, Monica, would be to tell us about Creative Commons and why they started the Open Climate Campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. So Creative Commons, we just recently celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. And really what Creative Commons does is have tools to make it easier or to better share creations that may be music or art, images, text, knowledge, by putting licenses that make it very clear how you can use and reuse materials to enable better sharing, because we believe that when it's easier to share, when we have access to culture and to knowledge, it can lead to a better world. And so at the Open Climate Campaign, we're looking at that entire spectrum of knowledge and focusing specifically on climate change and the intersection of open and climate change, and why we need to have
Creative Commons is an international organization, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we have country chapters all over the world in almost every continent. And then we have a headquarters where I'm based, although we're a remote organization. And we've got employees, again, all over the world, in the Netherlands and Canada and the United States, that interface with this global community.
Rick, did you have anything you wanted to ask at this point?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to make a point about one of the dangers that we're heading into, and that is as we try and make it easier for people to get hold of science, a good science, there's a danger in that there are really two kinds of journals out there. There's the trade journals, which are supported by the corporations, and then there's actual science journals. And right now, science journals are supported by the dues-paying members, the scientists themselves, who have a strong motivation to get it right. Corporations can have other motives, obviously. And part of the paywall issue is trying to make sure there's compensation for those very expensive journals to get done. I'm worried about how equalizing may get affected in this way, in a negative way. I wonder, Monica, if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So what do you mean by? If we could just get a little clarification about equalizing.
Well, I'm thinking if we, obviously, it's good for the public to make them more able to read the direct science, but it's also expensive. It's expensive, and the corporations, of course, can afford to get their message out there without the public having to pay, and that's actually not to our benefit as a society.
Yeah. So let's tackle the question of open access, and maybe we should take a couple of steps back if you're not familiar with the publishing process. And
Monica.
Yes?
Monica, before we start this, let's take our break so we can focus on that conversation. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the KSQD.org website. Our topic today is, how can we unlock climate science? If we are going to solve our global challenges, the global knowledge, meaning the research, data, educational resources, and software, must be open and available to all. And we're speaking with Monica Granados, Assistant Director of Open Climate at Creative Commons, working on the Open Climate Campaign. To learn more about Monica, visit monicagranados.com. That's MonicaGranados.com, and learn more about the international nonprofit Creative Commons at creativecommons.org. And I'm here with my guest, co-host, Dr. Richard Nothinus, Astronomy Chair at Cabrillo College. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
And we have an update from our associate here at KSQD, Tony Russomano, about the weather and flooding situation. Our neighbors in Pajaro are suffering catastrophic and uncontrolled flooding due to a levee breach on the Pajaro River. More than 2,000 people were forced to leave their flooded homes before dawn Saturday. Many were taken to an evacuation center that's been set up at the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds. The floodwaters have forced the closure of Highway 1 southbound at Riverside Road, Highway 129 in Watsonville. Highway 1 is then closed in both directions at Salinas Road, just across the Monterey County line. The evacuation center at the fairgrounds has stopped taking donated items for today in order to save space for more evacuees, but here's how you can help. Consider making a donation to the nonprofit organizations currently on scene, including Community Bridges, Second Harvest, or All In Monterey. In addition, Community Foundation Santa Cruz County and Community Foundation for Monterey County are accepting online donations, with all the money to be used to provide grants to trusted local nonprofits for needs including food, emergency shelter, financial assistance to evacuees, and cleanup and recovery after the floodwaters recede. To make a donation to Community Foundation Santa Cruz County, go to their website at cfscc.org. There is currently a $100,000 matching grant from Julie Packard. The Community Foundation for Monterey County is online at cfmco.org. All donations are fully tax deductible. So again, the donation for Community Foundation Santa Cruz County at their website, cfscc.org. And the Community Foundation for Monterey County online, cfmco.org.
We are back. Would you like a friend to hear this interview on how can we unlike climate science? Well, Be Bold America is available as a podcast and pushed out to 10 podcast platforms. Subscribe for free from your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple, Google, and Spotify. Now, Monica, how do researchers in climate science communicate their findings, and how does everyone have access to those findings? Actually, before you answer that, we were in the middle of a question, weren't we? You were going to answer Rick's question, then we can go on to that.
Yeah, but I think the question you just asked gives a really good context to Richard's question. Yes. So I think it's helpful to know, like, what does open access mean? You know, we've been throwing out that word, and it sounds positive, but with some context, it might help. So when researchers want to communicate their findings, they push out their findings through journal articles. So sort of imagine them. I think you had, referenced the New York Times. Imagine it, just being like another magazine, like, Vogue or Time magazine, except it's full of articles about research. And a lot of the times they can be, very general across many scientific disciplines. Sometimes they're very specific to certain disciplines. But like many of the publications we just talked about, they require a subscription, like Vogue magazine, like the New York Times. Most scientists can access these publications because the library of the institution that they belong to pays that subscription for them. But for you and I, Jill, for example, if we wanted to go and read that publication in that journal, we don't have subscriptions to it. And I think Richard, mentioned how expensive some of these publications could be, either on a per article basis or the subscription for the whole year. We're talking like hundreds of dollars if individually we wanted to go and read this research. So the concept of open access interfaces there with the idea of taking down these paywalls and making it free to read all of the content in these journal articles. And so, at the surface, it said, oh, that sounds really great. Why don't we do this all the time? And like many problems or situations, it's complex. And so Richard alluded to the fact that, to continue to make these publications, there still needs to be revenue that goes into these journals. They can't just make them free, similarly, to Vogue or to the New York Times. So the prevailing model to make these publications open has been called either the gold open access model or a publisher provided open access model, which means that authors will pay the journal publisher a fee to make it openly accessible. So instead of a subscription that you would pay to read it, they basically sort of give a free pass so that anyone can read it. But of course, then we're just shifting the costs now from libraries now to individual researchers. But the good news is, and now we're hitting on Richard's question, is that there actually are a lot of different models to enable open access. So we don't have to necessarily do it through this author pays model. There are other models which include something we call a diamond open access model, which is that either like libraries or nonprofits or foundations, so the money comes from different places, but ultimately the result is that neither the reader nor the author is paying to make that publication open. The costs are being paid from different places. We also have go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, let me just make a note, because some people may not realize this, although of course you do, Monica and Jill. But authors are not paid to write these incredible articles with so much work involved. They pay page charges just for the privilege of being able to submit it to a journal. And hopefully it will get refereed properly, and it will be accepted by the editor, and then it will actually get published. The money ultimately comes from granting agencies like the National Science Foundation, and I'm wondering whether that might be just something you could add on to your grant proposals. Is we want to make this open access, and that means I need to ask for a little bit more, not just to pay my grad students and postdocs to do the work, but also to make sure everybody can see it.
Yeah, and I think that works in certain cases. I guess the fundamental potential issue with going that route is that now you're essentially asking sort of for double the amount or an extra bit of money to make this publication open for research that has already been paid by the public. And so, and that also means that now we're using more money, more public funds to make this information accessible to the public that paid for it. And so I think we need to think about to be creative, and think about other ways and other tools that we can use that doesn't necessarily require making things more expensive to make them open.
Sounds good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and
you were.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So no, and I think that context is really important. And I think if you're, not, as Richard mentioned, if you're not a scientist or a researcher or an academic, you'll say, oh, I published a paper, and maybe your friends that work in marketing might say, oh, great. Like, will you get a royalty payment from publishing, this paper? Or like, if I read it, will you get paid? Or if I get a subscription to that journal, will you get paid for this contribution that I'm making to read your publication? And the answer is that you don't, right? The system is pretty surprisingly different than what you would expect from a traditional publishing model if you were, for example, publishing a book or a commercial book, like a novel or a nonfiction book, for example, or like your book, Jill. The idea is that you are getting paid through your salary to produce this research. It gets published in these journals because that's just the way that it's worked for hundreds of years. And that's the currency that is used to measure your performance as a scientist. So these publications are incredibly valuable, and also the reason why the system hasn't changed very much, because as you go through your training as a graduate student and eventually as if you become a professor, you know the value of these publications, and you know that you have to continue to contribute and output publications, because that is how you get a job, that's how you get promoted, that's how you get grants. And so this is what I meant in my introduction, is that these incentives are pretty perverse in that there's really no incentive to work in a different model because you need to produce these publications. And understandably so, you follow the system because you want to get a job, because you want to get a grant, you want to continue to be in the system. So disrupting the system is pretty difficult, but that's why we have these movements like the Open Access movement, like the Open Climate Campaign, to try to change the system and make it easier to make this information more accessible.
So what is the Open Climate Campaign doing to help get us to access these findings, and why is it important?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk about the importance part first. And so we've set up this scenario that scientists publish their research findings in these journals. Some are accessible. The majority of them cannot be accessed by the general public, sometimes not even other scientists if their institution doesn't subscribe to that particular journal. And the way that science progresses is by iterations, by steps, by learning from previous work, iterating on that and improving it and understanding processes in succession. And so if you don't have access to papers from the past or current literature, it's really difficult then for you to think about how you're going to improve or progress science. So to take it from a very general discussion to a very specific discussion about climate change, if we are going to understand how to solve the climate crisis, we really do need to understand the processes, the meteorological processes, these atmospheric processes, the change in biodiversity and species abundances through science, and iterating on that science to help us understand how we can mitigate or solve some of the problems that are being brought upon by climate change. But if we can't access those, then we can't iterate on them. So the Open Climate Campaign is taking a very complex problem like climate change and focusing on this one aspect of climate change, which is making the knowledge open and making that knowledge more accessible. So we're doing it in a couple of different ways. The goal is to make the open sharing of research outputs the norm in climate science. So we're doing it by talking to scientists and talking to them about the importance of the work that they are doing and why it's important for them to use open methods and open access so that people can have access to the invaluable work that they're producing. We're also thinking about how do we incentivize. I talked about how most scientists are incentivized to produce publications and not necessarily in open access publications or making it open. So we're working with funders, environmental organizations, and national governments to implement open access policies. So an open access policy basically says if you're a grantee, so if you're receiving a grant to do your research, when you're done doing your research and you're producing a publication from that research, it needs to be open access. And it could be done, again, in many different ways. There's many different models that do not require additional funds to make that information open. We're also looking into opening up some of those past publications that right now are maybe behind a paywall, but are considered to be really important, fundamental, foundational science in this field, and looking at how do we open those past publications so that new research can iterate on that. And finally, we're looking at sort of at the international scale, how do we implement open access in international frameworks and ensuring that we work at an international scale?
Well, this is, it's so important because I believe at the last COP27, we learned that not one of the countries that are members of the of COP27 have met their goals. So, to a break, you're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the KSQD.org website. My guest host is Dr. Richard Nolthinius, and I am speaking with our bold guest, Monica Granados, Assistant Director of Open Climate at Creative Commons. We will be back right after Jim Hightower's commentary titled, Get Ready for Roving Bands of Book Banners Coming to Your Town.
Not so long ago, book burnings were considered a festive group activity by assorted right-wing zealots. Today, though, burning seems so old-fashioned and, well, crude. Yet the concept is burning hotter than ever among a gaggle of testosterone-driven Republican leaders eager to show voters that they will go to extremes to incinerate progressive ideas and people's personal liberties. Rather than lighting bonfires, though, the new fad for GOP politicians is simply to use government power to ban the offending books, thus saving the expense of matches and lighter fluid. It might not surprise you to learn that our Lone Star State's extremist political operatives are leading today's book banning frenzy. One Jonathan Mitchell, for example, is going from town to town pushing Texas Republican office holders to pass local ordinances he labels safe library patron protection. Yes, patrons, censoring what you can read is necessary to protect you. The GOP ban prohibits libraries from having books, videos, etc. that contain, quote, immoral content, which he defines as depictions of nudity, sexual behavior, mentions of masturbation, LGBTQ life, etc. It's also autocratically homophobic, making it illegal for librarians to display LGBTQ flags. He even concocts a right of right-wing vigilantes to enforce the ordinances, authorizing bounty hunters to roam the countryside suing local libraries and individual librarians. To spur this political malice, Mitchell's scheme provides a $10,000 reward for every violation a vigilante finds or fabricates. This is Jim Hightower saying, of course, repression doesn't recognize state borders, so the pernicious idea of paid library marauders is spreading across the country. To help defend your freedom, go to American Library Association, ALA.org. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you subscribers to Jim Hightower's Lowdown on Substack. Find us at jimhightower.substack.com.
Welcome back. We are interviewing Monica Granados. Learn more about Monica at monicagranados.com and learn more about Creative Commons at creativecommons.org. Now, Rick, I'm not in the studio with you, but I just have a feeling, I'm just getting the feeling you have a question.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we're on such the same wavelength, Jill, that yes, you're correct.
Yes.
So I wanted to point out to the public that, scientists are not generally rewarded much for any kind of public outreach. You're really rewarded as far as status and looking for the best positions by your publication record. And I like the idea that Monica is initiating the idea of just making the paper itself as open access, as just part of the deal. That's something that, again, scientists are... The other thing I wanted to mention is that scientists, the money that they get from these granting agencies, it's not so much to enrich them. It really doesn't. That's their salary is supposed to do that. It's to actually help graduate students and postdocs get funded while they're at the very beginning of their career for, frankly, doing a lot of the grunt work and doing the research. So Monica, yeah, I'm curious as to how you are proposing to change the motivational structure so that people will want to do this.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, and you reiterated. So think about that papers are this currency, and when you go up to apply for a position, the first thing that a review committee is going to look at is how many publications did you publish, how many people cited it. That means how many people mentioned your paper in their paper. So they're really looking almost just on those publications.
Right.
But but it's so then it's so important to change those incentives, those tenure and promotion frameworks as part of a movement to change towards more open practices.
Yes.
Even if we have, these policies that require you to open your publications or to publish openly, even to make your data open, I really think another crucial step is going to be to change the way that scientists are assessed, and to include not only publications, but also, are those publications open? Is your data open? And then some of that outreach that you also talked about. So if we want to make science more accessible, not only to scientists, but to a broader audience, then the scientists that are doing the outreach, that are going on, radio shows, that are doing podcasts, that are doing talks, should also be rewarded for that really important labor and work that they're doing to communicate their science. And that needs to happen by reviewing the frameworks by which that they are assessed. And I think that's an incredibly crucial step to make enable a transformation towards what we call open science as a whole.
Can you tell me what your reception has been from climate scientists in particular? Because I, from my reading of all the literature, all I've done the last 12 years, I would think they would love what you're doing. That they are frustrated that the work that they're doing is basically only happening between a lot of other researchers, and yet to actually change society, to really get a handle on and change the problem, we need all of society. We need the voters to get involved, and yet they're getting systematically misled by groups with other motivations.
Yeah, and that you could say that could be linked to not having access to this important peer-reviewed science.
Right.
So the reception has been generally incredibly positive. I certainly can speak from my experience. When I got into science, I wanted to do science not only to understand the world better, but for the science that I produce to be used in the betterment of society. And so I think you'll find that most scientists feel that way too, that they're doing it not only because they're curious about the world, but they really think that they can make the world a better place. And to enable that, they need to be able to produce research that then can be accessed by people who can then implement that science. So generally the reception has been very positive, but there is a bit of there are barriers to moving towards open practices. The first is that it also sometimes takes time. So if you're for example, if you're making your publication open through an institutional repository, so what that means is that maybe you publish your paper in a traditional journal that has a subscription, so it's behind a paywall, but you can deposit a version of that manuscript in basically like a library repository that anyone can access because there's no paywall. That's still an additional step that you have to take beyond just submitting it through the traditional journal process. And that's just a little bit more work that you have to do on top of all of the other responsibilities that you might have as a researcher. You're doing teaching, you're doing some admin, you're doing mentoring. And so doing this extra work that may or may not be recognized when you are assessed really is then not incentivized. Sometimes there's also just scientists that don't really know how to do that. They really only understand open access as either I pay for it or, it needs to go behind a paywall. And so, part of the work that we're doing here is trying to tackle those barriers. The first being trying to connect scientists with these tools and training that exists out there from many institutions and organizations like NASA, for example, who just put together a new training program for researchers to learn about open science and open practices so that they know about the spectrum of options that are available to practice openly. And then thinking about connecting with funders who then will incentivize these practices so that there's a little bit of that sort of extra push to engage in open practices like publishing open access.
Well, there's another aspect, and that is often research is very timely, can't even make it out through public outreach by people like me, for example. A part of a paper recently done discovering 2 rings around the Kuiper Belt object Quaoar. And it's really great stuff, and it's inspiring to students, and yet I've got to keep mum about it. I just said something about it. Until it's actually published.
Right, because that's your currency, right? That's your currency. So why would you give away the thing that, is going to determine the success in your field? But that's because that's the incentive, that's the incentive structure that we operate in. But it's a construct, right? We can't change that.
It's more because the journal says, no, you can't say anything about this until it's published. And I said, I'd like to talk about it right now. It's, there's nothing too controversial about it. There's one other thing, though, that I want to mention, and that is the more open you make climate science, I wonder if you're also making it more open to the potshotters out there who are just looking to take you down as somebody who actually believes in CO2 causing climate change and so forth. I wonder if there's some part of the scientists are thinking, if we make this too open, I think I'm going to suffer even worse on social media or threats or whatever.
I mean, certainly, and that's a real concern, particularly to climate scientists that may already be part of a marginalized group, and that that requires some thinking around how do we make it a safer space for the scientists. So how do we, maybe there's some communication that needs to be associated with the announcement or publication, or more contextualizing around the science that gets communicated out. I'm skeptical of this idea that if we make science more open, it will sort of invite more, conspiracy theorists. I think that there will always be people who will, take good peer-reviewed science and transform it in a way that supports their story. I think this is also then why we need to have incentives for scientists to communicate science in a way that makes it easier for the public to understand, for scientists or for the support system around science to be proactive in the communication and the teaching of science.
Yeah.
I think that it also hits on, something that we're also tackling in the Open Climate Campaign, which is climate education and education about climate change. How can we make it easier to get materials about climate change into curricula, but also to make it easier to access, to look at what are open educational resources that we can make more easily available, free of charge, that educators can then use to put into their curricula so that we are producing educated middle schoolers, at elementary school, high schoolers, who then have that really good baseline understanding of climate change and the science behind climate change. So they will become, more understanding of the processes involved in climate change, especially as it continues to affect our everyday lives.
Well, I see fossil fuel sponsored publications showing up in my mailbox, completely uninvited, very polished, very expensive looking, and they're going out to all teachers. And so we need sunlight is the best antiseptic. So what you're saying is correct.
Great.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with our bold guest, Monica Granados. Monica has devoted her career to working in the open more equitable and accessible open space field. Learn more about Monica at monicagranados.com. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. I'm your host, Jill Cody, and I'm joined by guest co-host, Dr. Richard Nolthenius.
Join KSQD the second Sunday of each month. That's this evening for Intersections, hosted by Seth Shapiro. Intersections takes you to the crossroads of ideas, mapping the contours of belief and knowledge through the stories and lives of influential voices. Meet notable people in diverse fields who are asking important questions. Their experiences and perspectives challenge us to pursue lives of meaning and purpose. Tune in to Intersections this evening after Be Bold America at 6 p.m., KSQD 90.7 FM and KSQD.org. KSQD, many voices, one station.
Now, Monica, before we get into our Keep, Stop, Start section of the program, I was listening to your conversation with Rick, and, Rick's saying we need the voters. And yet, I don't know, about 40% of the voters seem to be under the right-wing political thrall. I have to ask, what is your opinion of right-wing politics fighting against making our planet livable for us and our children and our children's children? And I wanted to point out that in Rick Scott's 11-point plan, and being in Canada, you may not know about it, but Rick Scott's 11-point plan, number 11, under We Are Americans, Not Globalists, he 1 out of 15 points under that, he just mentioned, the weather is always changing. We take climate change seriously, but not hysterically. We will not adopt nutty policies that harm our economy or our jobs. Even though Rick Scott is sort of out of favor with Mitch McConnell, and the reason he's out of favor is that Rick Scott said out loud what they don't want said at all. And they're fighting literally against those brochures that Rick gets in his mailbox that are slick and well paid for. There's a force against what you're doing. There's a force against being open with this data that's well paid for and well funded. What are your thoughts around all of that?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. The first is that I think that I'm in Canada, so I really have an outsider's perspective. So, there's that caveat here. But
I'm glad.
I often wonder whether the motivation for this resistance to climate change or equity or diversity studies, it really is driven by fear. And a part of me thinks that it's understandable, but that might be our entryway into inducing change. I think people are afraid of believing that climate change is going to affect our everyday life, and that it's easier to think like today. It is. It's scary. We used to, the prevailing thought was that climate change was decades away, and it's now happening today and tomorrow and yesterday, and that's really scary. And it's easier to think about, if this isn't happening, then I don't have to act. And
the real problem is that the timescales for climate change are so long and yet so severe that you're doomed before you even see consequences. You might actually say, well, maybe we should do something. By then, it's far too late. It's like trying to drive the Titanic through an Indy 500 course. You can't do it.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's why, we need to think about how do we reach people who are scared because we need to have collective action. And that resistance really does makes this problem worse, because every day that we delay on this, the bigger the impact that climate change will have. But I think that, climate change is a complex subject, and the political dimension is as well. But at the very least, I would hope that we all agree on, all sides of the political spectrum, that we should have access to the knowledge. And I think that's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about working on a topic like open science, like open knowledge, is that both sides of the political spectrum agree that we should have access to that knowledge to be able to understand the problem better.
Do you have proposals that you'd like to share?
Regarding making
right. I think we've outlined the problem very well. And so, what do we do?
Well, that's the keep, stop, start, Monica. What can listeners keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to help you and Creative Commons?
Yeah, so I think what we need to keep doing is understanding the power of education and the importance of education being a right, and the importance of education being a public good. That we should make education and the knowledge that we produce, that eventually becomes part of the education that we go throughout formal education and beyond, and thinking about how we need to protect that. Because I think if we educate our population better, they have a better understanding of the problem that climate change is. And some of them may become scientists to help us tackle the climate crisis. But at the very least, we can have educated voters that will take collective action towards solving this problem. And so, the keep doing is continuing, I think, to support education as a public good, and part of that being climate education as a public good.
Yeah, most Republicans actually disfavor universities as a public good. They think they're a public bad, which is an amazing thing. And it gets reflected, for example, in student costs to go to education. You can't even discharge your student debt through bankruptcy, whereas coal companies can walk away from their devastated mine areas, even though they promise to rehab them after they leave, by just going bankrupt and walking away. It's so unequal.
Yeah, it's so unequal, and some days, it's really difficult to think about these challenges. They just seem unsurmountable. But I think about, what's that small change that I can work on? And for example, for me, it's working on this aspect of climate change, but to get the people of the United States or Canada or the world to put pressure on decision makers for that change. And I think to make foundational changes in the way that we teach about science, that we teach about the value of education, so that we can push decision makers to, for example, have policies that are actually effective regarding cleanup of mines.
We have about a minute left. Do you have some stop doing and start doing for us?
Yeah, so I think my start doing is to think about just where your understanding of science is coming from and our understanding of the world. And this doesn't just apply to climate change. I think that in general we should have access to the knowledge that we are producing, and that a very concrete example is, for example, if you're going to the doctor to understand the type of science that your doctor is reading, and you should have access to that science. And so to start understanding about the way that science and knowledge is produced, and to advocate for you to have access to that knowledge.
Some states have the proposition process where we as voters can actually write and form propositions that can then get voted on. And I think this would be a good one to demand any research that's happening in your state to be open access.
Absolutely, especially because most of it is you've paid for it, you know?
We need to wrap up. I'm sorry to say we could keep going, darn it. Monica, thank you for being our bold and impressive guest today. You know, this is a unique subject, and I'm really delighted that we're starting to talk about this. And Rick, thank you too to you for being part of this discussion. Monica, you're doing some very valuable work, and to learn more, remember to visit creativecommons.org. The climate crisis is civilization's disrupting event. Monica's and Creative Commons work is imperative work, and they must be successful. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you so much.
What's next on Be Bold America? Please join us on Sunday, March 26th, when we will be discussing the media and me. Media shape our sense of who we are, what we value, and our place in the world, against the backdrop of pundits and politicians promoting fearful understandings of fake news and the negative impacts of social media. The book, The Media and Me, empowers readers to become savvy media users who can analyze claims, see through manipulation, and recognize when political or economic interests drive the media we use. For this program, we will be interviewing one of 10 authors of this timely and imperative book. Dr. Allison Butler is the director of Media Literacy Certificate Program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst Department of Communication. Dr. Butler also co-directs the grassroots organization Mass Media Literacy, where she develops and runs teacher trainings for the inclusion of critical media literacy in K-12 schools. She is the author of numerous articles and books on media literacy, including Educating Media Literacy and Key Scholarship in Media Literacy. Find out more about your relationship with the media by joining Be Bold America on Sunday, March 26th at 5 p.m. for The Media and Me. As a reminder, Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you may listen to the show anytime for free by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. I want to give a special thank you to Eliza James and to Dr. Richard Nolfenius. Thank you again, Richard.
Thank you,
You are
Jill.
listening to KSQD, Santa Cruz, Many Voices, One Station. Listen worldwide, online at ksqd.org. Stay tuned for Intersection with Seth Shapiro. My name is Jill Cody, and thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.